Hello and welcome to part one of Touring England. We are going to be visiting London, the first stop on our trip. Hosts are J.Q. Rose and Gardener Ted. Here we're pictured in Hebden Bridge, England, with the canal behind us. We left Chicago O'Hare Airport at 8:30 Central Time on Monday evening and made the 7-hour flight to Dublin, Ireland via Aer Lingus. We slept about 2 hours, enjoyed a delicious Irish stew. How appropriate for an Irish airline to serve. We weren't really sure what to expect about meals and snacks, but they fed us very well. Needless to say, our meal schedule was messed up as we flew all night and then, of course, arrived in London, which is 5 hours ahead of Michigan. From Dublin, we made the quick hour-and-a-half flight to London's Heathrow, hopped the bus about 11 a.m. and enjoyed the hour-long ride to Victoria Station in the center of London. I was so thrilled to drive into this city I have longed to visit all my life, and enjoyed the architecture, the enormous complexes of apartments, the very, very, very expensive car dealerships we saw along the way, and we were very glad we had decided not to rent a car until we left the city. The traffic is awful. When we arrived at Victoria Station, we walked a couple of blocks to check in to our lodging for the next 3 nights. We would be in London on this spot, just a couple of blocks from Victoria Station. It was a very small room and not a posh hotel, but we only needed a place to sleep and shower, so it was okay. We left our things in the tiny room and headed on back to Victoria Station. We loved all the bustle of activity at the station, and there were many retail shops, coffee shops, a food court, and, of course, the train station. We bought a SIM card for our phone to make calls in England and Europe, so we could have picked one up from a vending machine at the airport, but someone suggested we wait and get the card from a vendor there at the station. And boy, am I glad we did, because the 2 young men were so helpful and they were funny, and they even installed the card in our phone for us. We explored the choices of bus lines who all offer that hop-on, hop-off ticket. It was very confusing, so we asked a woman who worked for the Tourist Council for help. She walked us through the station and around behind it, and I thought, wow, is she leading us to an alley where we're going to get mugged? But no, she wanted us to purchase the tickets from a trusted vendor. So we bought tickets for the next 2 days from the original bus tours. The bus company had a guide on the buses, and the guides were excellent on every bus we rode. I was excited to be able to fulfill another wish on my list, ride the open-air buses to see London from the top deck of the bus. The next morning was a bit cool and misty, and we set off very early for Buckingham Palace. It was so interesting to walk along the sidewalks and see the many diverse cultures and ethnic groups on the streets. Cute kids dressed in their straw hats and school uniforms were on their way to school, accompanied by their mum. The hustle and bustle of the city was already apparent, and we had to think before we stepped off the curb to look out for oncoming traffic on the left side of the road. The bus dropped us off near Buckingham Palace. No buses are allowed to go by the palace, as commanded by the Queen. What a thrill to walk along the sidewalk, getting closer and closer to a palace I had read about all my life. Notice the red road in front of the palace gates. All the roads the Queen travels on are painted red, kind of like a red carpet for her. Originally known as Buckingham House, the building at the core of today's palace was a large townhouse built for the Duke of Buckingham in 1703. I had a difficult time fathoming the ages of the buildings in the UK. In the States, we have very few buildings that are so ancient, but there are several throughout this area. The fountain and statue in front of the palace is a memorial for Queen Victoria. Lovely sculptures and artwork adorn the base and all around the statue. Across the way is St. James Park, a peaceful green place where even Prince Harry and Meghan take a carriage ride on Sunday afternoons. The Palace Guard. Notice these are not the foot soldiers we see pictured in their big bearskin hats and red coats. I'm not sure who the soldiers were who were guarding at that time, but it is an honor for any of the military to guard the palace for the Queen. We walked on down to Trafalgar Square to find the bus company office where we met for a walking tour for the changing of the guard. I had no idea we were in for such a treat. There's a lot more to just changing the palace guard. The guide was full of information about the area and related so many stories about the monarchs and the history as we walked. He took us to an intersection near the Wellington Barracks, where the new guard would march from there to the palace accompanied by a band. Take a look. Next, we walked down through St. James Park and around to Spur Road to watch the parade of the foot soldiers and horse guard and band marching to the palace. Then we stood across from the palace to watch the changing of the guard, but since it was so sunny and warm by then, the guide suggested we move on because it would be half an hour before that happened. This picture is of the horse guard. And the Horse Guard exchanges their guard at an area called the Horse Guard Parade in Whitehall. We captured a bit of the pomp and ceremony in this video clip. Beautiful horses. And the white horse is only in the guard when the Queen is in residence at the palace. And, lucky for us, she was. No, we didn't get invited for tea. This is the famous London Eye, and it's located on the Thames River, and that is a huge tourist attraction. Tourists sit in the enclosed capsules and survey the entire city as they ride to the top like a Ferris wheel. The guide told us many people get married at the top, but then it's downhill from there. We didn't take the 30-minute ride. You can see the London Eye in the background there by the river. This interesting feature as you enter Westminster Bridge is loaded with padlocks. Take a closer look. Young lovers or old, I'm not sure, put their names and the date on the padlock and attach it to this post. Then they throw the key in the river to indicate their love is forever. This is the boat that we took on the river. The ride was free with our bus ticket, and it was a lovely cruise, a little cloudy and gray, and yet still beautiful. The guide pointed out all the interesting landmarks, including the Shard, the tallest building in England and UK. You can see the unusual, exquisite shape of this building. It was disappointing to see Big Ben, the big clock tower, right there on the river, covered with scaffolding. They were doing some renovation work, and so it was really tied up. We didn't get to see much of anything but the face. But do you know what Big Ben is? Actually, that's the large bell in the tower. The housing of Big Ben is the Elizabeth Tower of Parliament. The nickname was first applied to the Great Bell. It may have been named after Sir Benjamin Hall, who oversaw the installation of the Great Bell in 1859, or maybe after a heavyweight boxing champion, Benjamin Conte. As we floated down the river, we came across so many landmarks that were so famous, and of course this is the very famous Tower Bridge. And it's a combined drawbridge and a suspension bridge, and it was built between 1886 and 1894. The bridge crosses the River Thames close to the Tower of London and has become an iconic symbol of London. We left early again the next morning to take the bus to another famous and historical landmark in London, Westminster Abbey. Awesome and gorgeous is how I described the building in my journal. I was just overwhelmed by the intricate architecture and the history of this place. We stood outside in line and watched the people line up behind us, and we were very happy that we'd gotten an early start because the line of visitors grew longer and longer as we stood there. Unfortunately, there's no photography allowed in the Abbey, so I don't have any photos of the interior. And I didn't know what to expect when we went in, but it was not exactly the feeling of awe that I had planned on. Instead, it felt uncomfortable to me with all the burials and memorials. There was so much to see, but the crowd was very large, and we couldn't stay as long as would have been necessary to cover the entire area and comprehend all the history. Since the coronation of William the Conqueror in 1066, all coronations of English and British monarchs have been in the Westminster Abbey. There have been 16 royal weddings at the Abbey since 1100 AD. Every king and queen has been crowned in Westminster Abbey since William the Conqueror in 1066. I especially appreciated the Poets' Corner, where there are so many English writers interred. Chaucer, Dickens, Alfred Tennyson, Thomas Hardy, just to name a few. Other areas were the final resting place for generals, admirals, politicians, doctors, and scientists, such as Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. Stephen Hawking's funeral service was scheduled for the next day, so they planned to close the Abbey at noon to get ready, and then we heard they were closing at 3 o'clock. But lucky for us, we were able to watch the large number of floral designers descend upon the Abbey. They belong to a floral association that travels around to do this kind of work and to keep up with the flower industry. We enjoyed talking to them and to watch the progress on the magnificent bouquets created throughout the Abbey. We visited the Tower of London on our anniversary. This view of the Tower of London is taken from our boat ride when we went down the Thames River. So as we got off the bus, we asked a tour guide exactly where would be a good place for a dinner. We'd like to find a good pub, and he suggested the Wetherspoons pub, which is right across from the Tower of London. So we arrived there late in the afternoon and found the ticket booth with lines of people, and we asked the clerk where Wetherspoons was, and he said he knew it very well because the people that worked there loved to eat there, and it was just across the street. So, sure enough, we found it and ordered our fish and chips. Who knew 48 years after our wedding we would be eating our anniversary dinner in a restaurant across from the Tower of London? The Tower of London is officially known as the Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of the Tower of London. It's a historic castle located on the north bank of the River Thames. Right here is the outside wall of this huge complex of buildings. And the Beefeater, who is a member of the Queen's Guard of Soldiers, was the guide. They do all the storytelling, and I'll tell you, they have a lot to tell because the castle was used as a prison from 1100 until 1952. Although originally it was not its primary purpose, a grand palace early in its history, it served as a royal residence. It was built by William the Conqueror in 1078. I was surprised to find out that in the 1200s there was a royal menagerie of all kinds of animals, including lions and tigers and monkeys and bears. Oh my! But also the crown jewels are on display, and you can imagine they are guarded by the Queen's soldiers. But within the museum where the crown jewels are, I didn't really see a guard. The jewels are breathtaking, and their historic significance makes them even more of a treasure. So many jewels and gold and precious metals, so ostentatious and impressive as the royal family should have. I dared not compare my little 48-year-old diamond to those on display, but it is truly more precious to me than any of the Queen's jewels. We rode the bus back to Victoria Station, our home away from home, and stopped at a coffee shop there. It was a lovely way to wind up the day and discuss what we had experienced. But now I wonder how Ted is going to top this anniversary for next year. The next morning we were excited to get out of London. We walked to the Victoria Station and boarded our bus to the airport. And then we picked up our rental car. We were really anxious to get out onto the highway, away from the traffic and congestion of the city, and see the English countryside. Thanks for exploring a bit of London with us. Next time, we'll be behind the wheel, driving on the left side of the road through Bath and into the lovely Cotswold region. Come along and join us, won't you?